I grew up in the Baptist church, so we were taught Father, Son, Holy Bible. So the third member of the Trinity was not always actively taught about or expressed, but when I was a kid, God spoke to my mother and father and called them to be missionaries. We moved to Kuwait when I was 10 years old in 1990. We arrived in May of 1990, and nobody knew anything about Kuwait. It was just this little dot on this map in the Middle East. But 3 months later, on August 2nd, 1990, Saddam Hussein and Iraqi troops, the fourth largest army in the world, invaded Kuwait, and we were living right downtown.
The soldiers came into our home and sexually assaulted my wife. And so we knew we had to leave quickly. I was held downstairs by gunpoint, AK-47 to my chest. And so I didn't see this. But when I came back up the steps into the apartment, it was obvious everybody was traumatized. And so I gather everybody together, and we all jumped in a car and drove out of this downtown. Now, my car was shot up. There was actually a bullet in the hub of the car that didn't blow the tire out. And as we were leaving, dead soldiers all around us. And then we turned between the church compound and the apartment building, and there were Iraqi soldiers all around us. And we drove right through the middle of them as if God blinded them. Because being the minister in the community and also being a therapist, George H. Bush asked if I would come into the embassy. Within a few days, the embassy got locked down. They eventually turned off the water, the fresh water, and electricity to get us out. Heat was 120 degrees, very hot, and no air conditioning. So we endured that. But the hardest part, I think, came 6 weeks later when Lori and Peter and Aaron left the embassy, and I turned them over to Iraqi soldiers to take to the airport. Those are hard moments, even this been 30 years later. When your family leave, you feel abandoned, okay? And the days after that to deal with things like, okay, how many body bags do you have? We don't have any. Well, if you're coming to rescue us, we only need X number of body bags because we all are not going to survive. And then turn to God. God, if my life is taken, are you going to take care of the boys? Are you going to take care of the wife? Can I trust you? What was going on in the background of the story that I didn't know was thousands and thousands and hundreds of thousands of people were praying for me personally. I didn't have any idea.
My mom, my brother, and I now were back in Nashville living, and it was coming up for the Lottie Moon Christmas offering that the International Mission Board of the Southern Baptist Convention puts together, a week of prayer leading into this big offering every December. And there were literally millions of Christians all throughout the country that were praying specifically for Maurice Graham to be released from being a hostage in Kuwait in 1990. So there's a story about another king who lived in the same area of the world, King Nebuchadnezzar, who was a pretty wicked and evil leader, but God troubled his spirits in the dreams, and he was confused and he didn't know what to do with it. And God raised up Daniel to help him interpret the dreams. And God even used Nebuchadnezzar at times to advance his purposes, even though he wasn't really surrendered completely to God. Well, thousands of years later, the same thing happened with Saddam Hussein, that he began to not be able to sleep at night. He would wake up and say that God had been troubling his spirits, that he had been having these dreams. And one day in early December, he called his cabinet together and said, I haven't been able to sleep. My spirits have been so troubled. And he ordered all of the hostages in Kuwait and Iraq to be immediately released.
On December the 7th, the second person in charge in the embassy came to me and handed me a little note. And the note says something like, Saddam Hussein woke up this morning and God had troubled his dreams and he was going to release all the hostages. I thought she was playing a joke on me. And she said, no, we were being released. And I still didn't believe it.
You have to understand the political context of that day to understand how radical that decision was, because he had no incentive, no political, no financial incentive to release the hostages, because it was the only thing preventing the rest of the world from coming into Kuwait and driving him back into Iraq. And so even later when my dad got to meet former President H.W. Bush, you know, it really, in Secretary of State James Baker, they did not have a diplomatic explanation. And it was confirmed that Saddam Hussein indeed complained about these dreams that were troubling his spirit. And so for me at 10 years old, it really built up my faith to believe that God can move on the hearts of even the world's most evil leaders. So some people would say that my parents weren't very responsible parents for taking me to Liberia, where a civil war broke out, and then to Kuwait, where the Persian Gulf War broke out. We lost all of our stuff in both wars. But rather than it taking me further from God, it actually helped take me closer to God. And God put a calling on my wife Amy and I's life to be in urban ministry and to be in church planting. And for us, that meant planting the district church in our home with very few resources, with a heart to move towards the hard places of this city and to be the hands and feet of Christ. But I believe that God is looking for people who are willing to move towards the hard places and stay even when it's hard, and trust that the Holy Spirit still speaks and confirms his promises in our lives.